Hey y'all, I'm Luce. I'm an engineer, an engineering manager. I'm currently the director of interviewing at Carrot. We're gonna talk about interviewing today in this workshop. The side that actually feels really good, the side where you have the answers with you, and you're the one asking the questions, that's what we're gonna focus on. It's always a little more calmer being on that side of the table. In fact, we will talk about how to help other folks be more comfortable. Before I begin, I just want to get a sense for like who all is here. Raise your hand if you interview other people at work. Like that's just sometimes you have to help hire people. Cool, that's great. Or if you're interested, you're like, let's pull back the curtain. What are interviewers doing? If you're cool, hey, I remember you, Vincent. So I will be focusing on technical interviews, but we're not going to be like writing code or doing anything like that in this workshop. So it'll actually probably be a little more general. Why don't we get started? And you all have a little workbook with you, and there's pens. If you need anything, one of our helpful volunteers will just get it for you. I'm just going to tell you what Carrot is, just as we get started, so you kind of understand the framework I'm coming from. I've been interviewing folks as an engineering manager for many years. I currently work at Carrot, which is dedicated to technical interviewing. So our clients, there's tech companies have a bunch of candidates, especially during like the fall, early career university hiring period. They have all these candidates. Instead of using their engineers' times who are trying to build products for them, instead of sending those candidates to their engineers for a phone screen, for example, they'll send them to us at Carrot. We'll actually do a full interview. It's online, but it's with a friendly and trained interviewer. And then we'll send those results back to that client. And then we can, because we're doing, at this point we've done tens of thousands of interviews, over 20,000 interviews. We have a ton of data that we can use to improve our own platform. We do a ton of like research and development around questions, around conduct, all these things. But also just for a specific company, we have all of their data that we can use to analyze with them and help them understand their sources or their on-site to offer ratios and different things. So that's what Carrot does. And at Carrot, I'm mostly focused on how we actually interview our interviewers. How do we hire interviewers and train them and help them level up? So we're going to start with some group practice together. I'm going to go through a communication model. That's the main takeaway from this workshop is about 4 different kinds of communication and how to do that better. And then we'll have some Q&A. And in your workbooks, because I don't think we're going to have time for this, maybe we will, there's the materials you have to do some deeper like one-on-one practice, which I often do this workshop in a 2-hour setting, actually at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative on the 25th of October, so like it's a couple weeks or next week. We'll be actually doing this workshop again. You're welcome to come there in Redwood City. But anyway, there's some materials for doing some deeper practice, because practice is really that's really the thing, practice and getting feedback. Okay, so let us dig in though. We'll start with the group practice. So we're gonna have a question that is a pretty straight one from a programming point of view, just like a simple little toy question to help us think about this as like a technical interview. The question is, write a function that removes duplicates from a list of numbers, list of integers. I'm gonna role play being this interviewer that is not doing good things, okay? I'll be like well-intentioned, but very inexperienced. This is what I'm gonna be doing, and you guys are gonna be telling me like, oh, actually, that wasn't so great. I would like someone to come up here and help me do this. A candidate, someone who knows that you are not being judged. This is not a real interview. You're excited? Come on up here. Great. So in your packet, there's different personas. What we're going to start with is this first one where, someone who's nervous and experienced. We're doing a bunch of like intern hiring, college hiring, and hey, what's your name?
Howard.
Howard. Here, Howard. You can use this mic.
Cool.
Thanks for being game. So, like imagine when like maybe the first time you've ever interviewed before. So here's what you can think about. You don't know the drill. So for example, you would like jump straight into coding, or you wouldn't know what you have to explain, right? You haven't had to explain these things before. You're just like, I gotta solve this coding problem.
Yeah.
Like you don't think, I gotta talk about edge cases or anything. You don't think, just like misunderstand everything, make all sorts of assumptions. And just be like overwhelmed. Sometimes you forget stuff. You know,
Yeah.
someone's like, hey, what's the complexity? And suddenly you're like, wait, is that big O? Is this something else? I don't
Time,
know.
space, what are we talking about here?
Exactly, right? Cool. And there's no need to actually be nervous.
I don't have to pretend that much. I've been in this situation before many times. So, yeah.
Perfect. And I'm trying to think if, are you, should we go through like what your answer might, like, do you want to have a script before we even start so you're not actually thinking on the spot?
I can think on the spot, I think.
Okay, well, if, in case you, feel free to pretend to freeze,
Okay.
so that you don't think that you necessarily have to freeze. So writing a function that removes duplicates from a list of integers, you could sort the input and then iterate through or something. We don't even need to think about that. Okay. Hey, Howard, we're going to start this interview. So, yeah, you're supposed to write a function that removes duplicates from a list of integers.
Okay. What's your name again?
I'm Luce.
Luce. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Howard. Okay.
It's how to interview your interviewer.
So, what language should I use?
Well, this is a JavaScript role, so
Okay.
you really should be very familiar with JavaScript.
Yeah. So let's see. The question is, write a function that removes duplicates from a list of integers. And then, so we have some steps up here. This kind of seems like this is the algorithm. Am I just?
Sorry, this was so that you feel like you didn't have to think about it.
Okay, sure.
So pretend like I just did the italics.
Okay, cool.
And now I'm in character, not
Now,
smiling.
scene, yeah.
Action.
So yeah, like, are there any like time or space complexity limitations on this? Like, any big O?
Yeah, I mean, if you can come up with like the most optimal solution.
So like in like linear or?
Well, would it be what would be the most optimal?
Well, brute force, worst case scenario, if we were to just jump in, we could just iterate or go through the array once, and then just maybe we could keep use another data structure to remember what integers we've already seen, and then as we go through the array.
Yeah, but what would be the space complexity of that?
Well, we'd have to go through it at least once.
Okay. So the space complexity.
Oh, space. Sorry, time, not time. Yeah. So I guess we have to create one array. So.
Well, look, it's okay. If you don't know it, we'll just move on. Yeah. Why don't you? So wait, how would your function work?
So in JavaScript, I could create like a map, and this map could have a number for its key and maybe another counter for its value.
Okay.
And then I could just iterate over the array and put an entry into the map for every new number that I see. And then as I'm iterating, if I find an integer or number that is already in the map, then
what would your values be?
They could be Boolean, like true or false, or it could be a counter of how many times I've seen the number.
I'm gonna cutscene.
Yeah.
Howard, you're doing amazing. I feel like you've figured out how to interview a bad interviewer as a candidate.
I'm trying hard to not.
You're making me look good, which is not even the point
I know,
of this.
Sorry.
No,
so
you're great.
I used to interview at Google people, so now I'm trying to go through the things that I would see typically of nervous.
Yeah.
I mean, most. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
First, let's just give Howard a round of applause for being on the spot. But before you sit down,
Okay.
what was your candidate experience like? What was,
Just now in this scene.
Yeah, just now in this role play.
I think not so you not introducing your name, and then maybe a product area that you're in, or a fun fact about yourself, or maybe even where you went to school, or what you do primarily, or your level. Just having some bit of information about you, it seemed very transactional, and like it was kind of like a robotic experience where you don't really care about who I am or whatever. It's mostly just about like my performance. And I also don't think there were much like parameters set for me, like guardrails of how I should operate or how I should engage this experience. So I was kind of nervous, like, okay. And yeah, I just think there wasn't like an ownership or like grace or empathy for me to understand that like this is a very nerve-wracking experience for me. I'll go a step further, like something that I did, which, you know, maybe one of you in this room or all of you could call potentially problematic, is if you were a person of color or a woman or someone that was underrepresented, I would kind of add this additional start off, because I know of like imposter syndrome, and people can get very nervous, and they're not just being like critiqued on their performance, but also like they're being critiqued on what they're wearing or how they look, or just all types of like nervousness, inferiority complex. I would just like reset and just be like, hey, let's pretend like we're just having a cup of coffee. Like, you're the senior software engineer, I'm the junior one on your team, and I came to you with a really hard problem that I don't understand. And so let's just pretend that we're sitting down and you're like leading me through that problem on the whiteboard. Like, I would create some scenario so that it's not a me against you. It's a like, you're the smart person. And 9 times out of 10, you are the smarter person, because by the way, secret, like if you're doing this interview, you've reviewed algorithms and data structures. I know about this one problem. Like very well. So awesome. yeah. Anyway, that
is such good advice. Thank you so much. Yeah. You know, it's actually true, right? As the interviewer, you're meant to ask questions. So like, it's okay for you to not know things. I always think that's a nice reminder that you're not even if you know the answer, it's often you're not supposed to say it, right? So no one knows whether you know or not. Howard, I would actually say, was not acting very, very nervous or inexperienced, but no shame there. But yeah, I guess in this situation, one of the biggest things interviewers can do is to be clear. So I guess, what else did y'all pick up on? And if anyone wants to role play being a really good interviewer, I'm happy to be a problematic candidate. But yeah, what did you pick up on?
Body language, no eye contact.
Yeah, like I was trying to act nervous. Like I was like, cause sometimes your interviewers aren't like, it's not, maybe it's like the first time you've been interviewing, or you haven't done it in a while. You're just awkward. You just feel like I'm a introverted engineer. What am I supposed to do here? I was just told to show up, and it's like totally unintentional. Body language, yeah. Even if like I was interviewing you and I'm standing and you're sitting, that'd be very weird, right? Like, let's get on the same level.
There were a couple of times that Howard was like trying to explain his reasoning, and you would like interject with a question in the middle, or say like, oh, it doesn't matter if you don't know it, let's move on. Versus I think like a stronger interviewer would try and like work with the candidate to understand it. Sorry.
No, you're doing great.
I was just saying there are some like interruptions of the candidate at various times, and
I never said anything encouraging. I never said like, yep, you got it. I was just like, where's the next problem that I'm gonna ask about?
And then also kind of in addition to that, like being dismissive of, oh, you don't know that, we'll just move on, instead of like, oh, let's learn about this together.
Yeah, it's gonna be very difficult when you have a candidate that is so different from your expectations, or what do you do? I think there's two situations. Like, what do you do when you have a candidate who's doing so much better than what you're expecting? And then what do you do if you have a candidate that you realize, like, maybe this, is a mismatch, but like, what do we do for the rest of this hour? And also, like, how do you not judge that book too soon? One thing I wanted, like, let's say, does someone want to come and interview me real quick? I'm gonna play a different candidate. You want to interview me? Here's what you're going to ask me. So you're going to ask me the same question, and what you're grading me on. Like, this is what's really, because we haven't even talked about this. As an interviewer, it's like, what is the actual rubric that you're looking for? because you don't know what signal and noise is if you don't even know, like, what's the signal. Your signal, what you just know that is really important for your team, is someone who thinks through edge cases, and who's going to find all the different edge cases, okay? So we're looking at this question, write a function that removes duplicates from a list of integers, and what you want to have this conversation with me about is like, what if it, this is a toy problem. So it's like, what if there's zeros? What if there's negative numbers? What if there's decimals? What, all those, what if it's invalid input? Okay, but you're gonna ask, yeah, so that's the situation.
Okay.
And pretend like you think that I know that's what I should do, that my recruiter has told me.
Okay, so I'll make that assumption about you.
Yeah, you know what, or just be, you're trying to do a really great job interviewing me and ask for that. That's cool. You know what, we're in this together, okay.
All right.
But I am very new and experienced, and my coaching has actually been something completely different, but you don't know that. Hi.
Hi, Ruth. How are you? My name is Namibia. I work at Carrot. I'm one of the interviewers here. I've been an engineer for 3 years here, and I'm really excited to do this interview. How are you doing?
Good. Excited too.
Great. So do you have any questions before we begin?
No, I'm ready.
Oh, wonderful. All right, so I have this problem that I'd like you to take a look at.
Okay.
I'll read it out to you, and feel free to take as much time as you want to think through it.
Okay.
So what I'd like you to do is to write a function that removes duplicates from a list of integers.
Removes duplicates from a list of integers. Perfect. I know exactly how to do this one. We iterate through the list, and so I start with one number, and then I look through the rest of the list to find a match. And if I find a match, I'll delete that. I'll delete it.
Oh, tell me how you're going to delete it.
Can I look up some documentation?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. So I'm just going to go look on, I'll just use I'll use this delete function.
Okay. And is that going to work if you, for example, have something that isn't an integer?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be able to delete anything. Yeah.
Okay, let's test it out and see what happens.
Okay, so type. Cool, here it is, a working solution. I'm pretty sure it's going to work.
All right, so I have another edge case. I really love that solution. Now let's see what happens if, let's see what happens if, for example, we have a nil value.
Run the code, error message. Nuts. Okay, let's say I fix that one. Okay, great, it's working now. It works in all cases.
Oh, you know what? I actually missed what you did to fix it. Could you walk me through that a little bit?
Oh wait, cutscene, you're doing amazing.
Okay.
Because I'm good job. Okay, so this is just, this I know seems like maybe a very contrived situation, but it's actually not. How many times have you been in a conversation after an interview, like the debrief session, and someone is like, man, this candidate was so great. They told me about all these different approaches, and it was such a great conversation about complexity. And then someone else is like, I cannot believe this candidate did not talk about edge cases and didn't even write tests. Why would we hire them? And first of all, it's how do you have two people come out of interviewing the same candidate with such different and extreme points of view, right? And I actually posit that, you know how in engineering, if who is in the room matters for a decision, that's kind of maybe the decision-making process, it needs some more work. If who is interviewing a candidate matters, that's a problem because it's not about the interviewer, it's about the candidate. So two people should be able to experience, at Carrot we actually do record all our interviews and do a interview review, just like there's code review for writing code. So if we have two people watching the same interaction and coming to different conclusions, well, that's a big signal to us. And one of the things that often comes up is, this is just one case I think of that comes up quite a bit, is when you're having this conversation about the approach, how do you know, if someone doesn't think about edge cases, how do you know, is it fair to have an interview where it's oh, this is ambiguous, and they were meant to ask clarifying questions and think about edge cases? Is that is that fair? I actually don't know. What do you guys think? So is it sometimes people will say, hey, this interview is meant to, one of the things we're looking at is how the candidate addresses ambiguity, and do they ask clarifying questions? Do they think of different edge cases before they write the code? Do they write test cases at the end? I mean, like on the face of it, those are great qualities. Those are things that are real in the workplace. You want people who can handle that. Yeah.
I often really thinking about like candidates asking a lot of questions and get all kinds of information versus someone who's really, really shy and just stick to the script and do whatever, and then which one you really fairly judge. It's very hard. So what I come up with personally is that just make sure, like I am asking actively if the person doesn't ask, like, do you think, is there any edge case you can think of? Because it could be really, I personally understand, like I wasn't a candidate, I didn't ask any questions. Even if I do have those questions arise in my mind, I was like, oh, if I asking this question, should I look weird or stupid? So that's how I come up with it, but it's really hard to judge in that case.
I have an opinion about this. I think, first of all, I think you're totally spot on that candidates, the interviewer is the host of the conversation. And just because a candidate doesn't say something, they're kind of waiting for you to tell them the next step. Like, oh, you told me to write this function. And maybe they're waiting for you to then say, what are the edge cases? Or like what, you know. And they don't know what they don't know what your rubric is. So I actually think that the only way for you to be disappointed in someone not talking about edge cases is if you then asked, could you tell me, like, please tell me all of the edge cases. Like, what are all the things you would test to know that your program, to verify, you know, to build confidence that your program works or this function works. Then, if someone lists, you know, some edge cases, but they miss some other things, whether, you know, especially if there's like still a bug in their code, then you're like, oh, I set that clear expectation and they have demonstrated their skills in this moment. And that's a better signal than, you know, like whether they magically read your mind. Mind reading, very seldomly something that we use in the workplace. So that'll, why don't we jump in to, oops, we did the action already. Oh yeah, hey, here's all the things I was trying to do. Yeah. Let's just jump into the models. Okay, there's gonna be two takeaways from this workshop. One is about what kind of communication to do during the interview, and then the second is a communication after the interview. Because you could have the best interview ever, but if you can't then like write that down and assess that like accurately or predictably for the debrief, you know, that would be a loss, or even for what you actually needed. So in interview, all of our communication falls into three things during an interview. We are either clarifying information, we're either giving encouragement, or we're giving like hints or guidance, that kind of thing. I think like most communication falls into those three things. And as interviewers, right, we're like the hosts of this like dinner party, this conversation, this whole experience. So we're setting that whole tone. Clarity, and here, by the way, and so what I'm trying to say, like this, you could think of all of this as guidance, like because you are guiding the whole interaction really, you're the one with all the power and knowledge in this situation. But really, clarity and encouragement are like free, you know, only hints are that kind of fuzzy area of like when do you step in and instead of assessing someone's performance, like when do you actually impact their performance and like move them forward, and like what is that, you know, that's like a whole complicated thing that we talk about with like coding in particular. But you know, clarity, encouragement, these are free things. And so on clarity, that's what I was just saying about like there's no reason that we should be judging something that we don't tell someone about. So if thinking of test cases is really important, tell them to tell you all the test cases. If optimality is really important, then you know that's why we then have that conversation of like, oh, you know, hey, this was a, you know, an n-squared approach, but you know, can you think of something, you know, better? Let's spend some time on it. If that's not important, for some of our carrot interviews, that's not important. We just want to know that they generally have some programming fundamentals, and we'll have that conversation later. And we actually have to tell people explicitly, you know, we want you to just write us working solution so we can move on to another problem, and don't spend 10 minutes, you know, perfecting your code or whatever. Like, help the candidate manage their time, because I do candidate workshops as well. One of the most important things for a candidate is managing their time strategically, because they have limited time to show all their strengths. And so that's kind of what candidates are trying to do. As interviewers, we're trying to, you know, help them and manage time as well. And all of that should be free. So basically be open about what behavior you're assessing, and it's really hard to assess more than one thing at a time, because, you know, like often there's trade-offs, and, you know, you're trying to set a priority. So if your goal is they Yeah, whatever the goal is at the time, tell them and ask them explicitly. I think that's pretty clear. Is there any other questions, like any kind of confusions that come up sometimes when clarifying? Actually, just thought of one more. Let's say you explain a question, and there are some edge cases, and sometimes candidates, they'll like make an assumption, like they'll assume like, oh, you tell them to solve an equation, and like your example only has single-digit numbers, and then they like give an approach where they don't take into account that like numbers can have multiple digits. Like, do you say something then? Like, is that, and some of this also is that you just have to figure out what you're looking for in your workplace and your roles, and like just agree to something that you can be consistent about, because maybe there aren't really right answers. I will say that I often think like, hey, for an interview that isn't about how well someone is making assumptions or not, or dealing with ambiguity, I feel like, so what we tell our interviewers is, if the candidate has incorrectly understood the question, like if they have made the wrong assumption or the wrong conclusion, like tell them right away. That's just free, because it's wasting everyone's time if they solve the wrong question. That doesn't mean maybe you can see that they're going to have a little bit of a bug to deal with later, and that'll get more into like hints, just like how do you. But like don't give them harmful guidance if it's gonna impact their score. Like don't tell them something like too soon. But yeah, if they've like misunderstood the question, I feel like just tell them right away. This would just be helpful. That's the only thing I can think of here. Any other questions before we move on to encouragement? Okay, encouragement. And again, I've separated these three things out because once we start to separate them, it becomes a lot more obvious. Because sometimes someone will think that they're trying to be quiet because they don't want to give a hint, because then a hint would mean they have to detract from the score or something. But the point is that these are sort of all free. Like telling someone, hey, great job, or smiling at someone and having open body language, like that isn't a hint. It's not, it's just connecting with them and making them comfortable so they can do their best. One thing we do at Carrot is that people, if they feel like they had a bad day for whatever reason, they get to redo. They get to just do it again. And we tell them that up front because it almost like lifts the burden from their shoulders to know that it's not their only chance. And I know some places will even invite candidates to come and meet their interviewers like the day before, or like see the space. There's all sorts of reasons why it's easy to have sort of like an anxiety response when you're in a new situation where you're being judged and you're just like hearing less and seeing less and thinking slowly. So encouragement is just to set someone a little bit at ease, and it's not like there's no cheat. Like for when someone does a redo, for example, it's like they still have to solve the question. We didn't actually give them anything. I guess the main thing I would think about with encouragement is that you want to be inwardly skeptical because you are interviewing someone. You want to ask those follow-up questions. You don't want to make assumptions. It's like you have to be a little more invasive. Like if you know about like behavioral interviews and smart answers or whatnot, it's like you want to ask those. You want to dig in and be like, what? But what? What really? How did you make that decision, or how did you communicate? You kind of ask those follow-ups. If someone gives you their algorithm, maybe you say, okay, can you just walk me through it on this input? Whatever the case is, you do want to be inwardly skeptical. You just don't want to be outwardly skeptical. Because no one likes that. No one likes to think that what they're saying isn't going to be believed. I have had that happen to me. We do role plays when we interview interviewers for Carrot. We have them interview us. And one time someone literally didn't believe that I was like just reading a script and I wasn't supposed to be lying. It was just like it was like a real project. And they're just like, I don't believe you did that. And I was like, it's awkward. Yeah. So don't be skeptical. That's like intimidating. But be skeptical inside, in your head. Any other questions or thoughts? I'm trying to think of challenging situations that sometimes happen. We'll get to that probably with like the write-up, like how do you actually assess? So hints. Okay. You're trying to maximize the candidate's your opportunity for success. Like you want to maximize their ability to succeed, get the best score, if there's a score in this. Like you're trying to open all those doors, right? Like say that you're trying to assess like the conversation about the algorithm before they write code, and like how do they talk about complexity. And if you have a candidate who's just like going straight into coding, you're going to open that door. You're going to say like, hey, do you mind, like, why don't you walk me through your approach to begin with? But let's say they don't know what, they're just like so confused, and after 5 minutes, you're just like, I don't think they even know what they're doing. I certainly don't know. Are you going to waste another 20 minutes like trying to have that conversation? Like, maybe not. You'd be like, okay, we opened that door. That wasn't the strength the candidate was going to show. That's fine. You know, you could, why don't you, start writing some code and get started, and maybe, some things will come to you. Like you just sort of move on, right? There's no set rules. You're just trying to open doors. With hints, here's the thing about hints. First of all, hints can be harmful. If you have a scoring, depending on how like clear your rubric is, at some point, you're actually going from being an interviewer to being more of like a mentor or a pair programmer, right? You start to say like, oh, well, you could use a hash map. And how, or whatever. Here's how you use a hash map. Now you try. That starts to look like maybe, you're not assessing what. Instead of them demonstrating something, you're being like, oh, I had to tell this person about this bug or something. So that can be harmful, right? So the first thing is don't give harmful guidance. If it's going to be negative later, like you don't want to say, oh, this person, they seem so young and timid, and they don't really know what they're doing, so now I'm going to have to tell them all these answers. Like, man, I hope that's really true and that you're not just tanking them for looking a certain way, right? Another thing with guidance that can be harmful is that it's so hard to hear someone else's point of view. So if a candidate is going down some track and you're like, I don't really think this is going to work, or this might take a long time, if you're doubting them, to be honest, just because I've done thousands of interviews now, well, at least 1,000. Candidates very seldom, in my experience, very seldomly can see your point of view and just like switch gears. You got to meet them where they are, and sort of give that next step and just like sort of open different doors. So be really careful about like confusing and harming a candidate that way, slowing them down. So you don't want to jump the gun. You don't want to slow them down. When do you want to give guidance? Like how do you know when to give guidance? If they ask. Okay, there's nuance there, but often, yeah, like, hey, they're asking, definitely should chat.
When they're obviously stuck?
If they're how do you know if they're obviously stuck? Maybe they're just thinking.
Well, just like there's no further going few minutes, awkward.
Yeah. So like say someone's just like staring, they're just like staring at the code. Whoops. Staring at the code. 2 minutes have gone by. What do you do?
I ask a question.
What do you ask them?
Asking about, what is your next step? Just if you can code, verbalizing it, maybe like try to get like a different like way, if it is not a code. But if that person can answer, then you could kind of give it out a little bit of hint.
Yep. Okay. What else? Howard in the back.
I guess like two things. One is if they like violate the method signature parameters of the question. So then you want to kind of catch them early so they don't continue coding on to, like you said, answering the wrong question.
Oh yeah, that's just like clarifying. They just did the wrong thing. Just clarify. That's not even a hint. Free.
The second thing is like, because a lot of times we use the same questions over and over again, we know the questions really well, and we know like sometimes the trap or like the pathways that people go down that might be like these rabbit holes that you don't have time to actually get through. And so sometimes if I see someone going left and I'm like, we're supposed to be going right or straight, like I might kind of like ask them like, okay, like I see you're doing this thing, and try to gauge if like they are, like if you try to solve a problem for more complicated data structure than actually needed.
Yeah.
Sometimes I try to gauge like, okay, well, are they just really good with that data structure? If so, I'm go for it, flex. But like if not, then I'm like, okay, maybe we should go back over here to this other one.
Yeah. How would you say that? Like say hey, I want to use this try, or maybe it's called tree or try. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's tough because you risk being condescending or patronizing or assuming incorrectly. So yeah, like.
Yeah, what'd you do? I'm like, hey, I really want to use this tree. I know we're just trying to do a simple binary search, but I'm going to use this really complicated graph structure.
Maybe just asking them like if they know the time complexity or the cost of this specific traversal, or like what's your plan there. I don't know. It's almost
I would say be even more direct. So I would say in this case, here, you did great, thank you, this is a good one. So I would say, Howard's bringing up a good point, like, hey, there's a lot of different solutions, and some solutions are simpler than others, and you want people to make it easy for themselves. The first thing I would figure out for your kind of like, hiring team, interviewing team is, does going right down this really complicated path, first of all, do you want to just tell people no? Do you just want to tell everyone, yep, that's a cool idea, but for our purposes, we actually just, that's way more complicated, don't even do it. Like, do you want it to be an option? Can someone use a regular expression? Even though I will say most people waste so much time trying to use like regular expressions in interviews, except for those 10% of people or whatever who are just like, it's like there for them. And so, and then maybe you don't want to shut it off. So you just decide like, what are you saying no to? And then if it is an option, but it's like, maybe not like the best option, you got to decide like, I would just be direct and just tell people, hey, this looks pretty complicated. You could continue down this route. That'll be fine. If you want to spend a minute thinking of something simpler, that's also we have time for that too. Just like be direct about whatever you need or whatever the situation is. Yeah, like you don't have to be like indirectly asking them about complexity because they don't know. They're trying to figure out, is complexity important? Or now I have to think about complexity. Oh no, this is much harder for me than something else or whatever. Yeah. And you mentioned, what was your name? You mentioned about Rachel. You mentioned asking questions.
Yeah.
I was actually gonna, if the candidate asks,
Yes.
which is great. That's one way. These are all, how do we know when the candidate's stuck?
The candidate says, I think I'm stuck.
Yeah, that's perfect. The only thing I will say is sometimes you have folks who are asking a lot for like confirmation, because it almost feels like pair programming, and that just might be their style, and they're nervous. And that's where encouragement comes in, which is free. You can always encourage someone. You can always restate what they've just said. You can always be like, oh, good job, you found that bug, or like, oh, your program's running, or whatever. I would just say be careful about someone who's just always asking. There's two things here. One is if someone's just always asking for help, you don't want to just give it to them. If you're actually silently tanking their score, maybe you don't want to just give someone all the answers just because of how they're interacting when nervous, if they don't need it. Sorry, you did great. And the other thing is that sometimes folks mean to ask questions and they don't because they're so nervous. They just kind of, or they're almost just like stream of consciousing their thoughts. So that's another thing to watch for. It's just like, to really try to stop and engage with someone. They might just be saying, you might think they're just saying stuff, but there's like this hidden little like uptick at the end of they're actually asking for something, but they're not really stating it as a clear question. And you might want to just stop and just sort of be like, kind of maybe give a direction, like, okay, what is this? And the main thing with hints is to just have something written down that you can all be consistent about. If someone asked, hey, can I look up documentation? Is it like yes or no? All your interviewers should know that like what it is. Or like, hey, maybe it's like, I'll be your documentation. Oh yeah, this is how you use delete. Like that's free, let's not waste time on it. As a programmer, you would have documentation during the interview, that's not our signal. How do you use whatever function? Or it's, on the whiteboard, it's like, just like make magic functions, we don't care. No one's gonna compile this code. But you just decide whether or not that's important, because at Carrot, we definitely see a wide variety of interviewers. Some people who think, I gotta be silent, or like, I can't give them this answer because like if someone had mastered this language, they would know it. I mean, I don't know, there's different things that we've been told. The main thing with hints is you wanna be clear about when do you step in? So like, what does it mean when someone is stuck? And again, this might change based on what your needs are. For some folks, it might be, hey, someone's spending 45 minutes slowly working through a question. That's fine. You never need to step in and speed them along. They're doing their thing. And other folks, it might mean, you might decide as a workplace, actually, we need people to reach certain milestones, and we're going to like step in so we can then move on to something else. For me, I think it's a very clear line when you're trying to figure out just whether someone is actually like stuck, or frozen versus just working slowly. But you want to kind of write some of that stuff down, and then figure out what it means to ramp up. So, and what it means for your scoring. So, asking questions, I kind of think that's kind of just free. Like that shouldn't be like, candidates shouldn't be seen as weaker just because you're having to sort of ask them questions. Or restating, if someone said like, oh, I'm going to iterate through this thing, and then they got confused, you could be like, hey, you mentioned iterating. Versus if no one had been, if they didn't even talk about iterating or going through the input, and you were like, what if you iterate? That might be maybe more helpful. But yeah, what is, kind of have some examples written down, maybe for each question, for the common situations, so that all your interviewers know when they're asking the question, they just see what the ramp up looks like. And then, ideally, you tie it to what they write down, the interviewer, what they're writing down as they're assessing the candidate. How are we doing on time? Great. So, real quick, when I first started interviewing, there was no asks on me about what I would write down. I didn't have to write anything down. I could just come to a debrief with whatever unstructured thoughts were in my head about what was important or not. So, that's a starting place. I think you can kind of build up, how do we progressively get more clear and more structured about our assessments? Structure has generally been shown to lead to more predictive and consistent results. There's the Yelp review. Hey, we care about how someone talks about edge cases, and like this is what 3 out of 4 stars means. And so you might have different skill dimensions as a kind of Yelp review. The danger here is that no one knows like what it means to be like 3 versus 2 stars or whatever. You might want to give examples. You have specific categories with the selections explained. This is what hard to read code looks like, and this is what easy to read code looks like, and then like what to circle basically. And then there's the question of, okay, you have these maybe 5 different skills that you've been trying to assess for this particular role. Their familiarity with the language and how fast they were to solve the question and all these things. But then sometimes if you've been to those debrief sessions where you're just like, but then should we actually hire this person? Like, are we even looking for a junior or a senior person? You're just like, wow, I wish we knew this like the beginning of the day. And so you kind of want to know like what your overall algorithm is almost. Like, is it that someone needs a minimum bar on each one of those dimensions? Or is it like you're just looking for like some really great strengths and like the other things are okay? Like how do you put it together? Does this make sense? And once you have that, ideally some kind of formal review process will really help with this. Once you feel confident that 2 of your interviewers could interview the same person and come away with the same like written assessment, that's when you know that you're doing that you have a very repeatable process that isn't dependent on the interviewer, but in fact is actually just eliminating the candidate. That would be a good check. Some kind of shadow program can really, and that of course is going to pass on the skills, just like code review, right? Code review is a great way to improve code decisions, but also just like teach people and bring consistency and style and all of that. So, and if you do a review process where you have 2 people in the room together interviewing, and then afterwards they do like 5 or 10 minutes, like a little retrospective. Hey, what worked, what didn't? But they don't say anything about the candidate. Like, let people write their own thoughts down separately, so that they're not becoming very extreme. So yeah, and just having it all be explicit and structured will be quite helpful. Use a deliberate assessment rubric. That's how you decrease noise. So. I want to leave time for more questions. We have 10 minutes. Yeah.
Cool. This is good presentation. I just had a question. How do you uphold ethics during the interview process?
And ethics of the candidate, or
by the interviewer.
Or by the interviewer.
Yeah.
Like any more color you can add, like whether an interviewer would.
Like if you're doing something wrong, like questions you shouldn't be asking. Like how should you be, unbiased towards the interview process? Oh, well,
this is going to vary on the processes that are in your own company. I mean, at Carrot, we train our interviewers on like a corpus of questions that we've developed, so that we can we have like kind of a whole research like data gathering, like this whole process with like test candidates who have been calibrated. And so ultimately after about I think it's 100 to 300 times that an interview question has been asked, we'll actually have data to know whether or not to take that question out of rotation or how it's performing. And we actually look for things like, if you have a question, what you really want to have is, you want it to be sensitive to different performance levels in like a kind of equal way. Like you want, I don't exactly work on this team, so I'm struggling with the words. But you can kind of, for what I was trying to say there with questions is that, if you have a question where there's like a cliff, for example, like that's probably not a great question. There's sort of different sort of graphs, things we look at. And so anyway, data is always helpful, maybe is what I'm trying to say. And I don't know if it's like unethical to simply, know whether or not a question is good or not. It's just like, hey, we're doing the best we can, and over time, if you can help your institutions like create more structure and whatnot, that'll always be helpful. In terms of, well, and we use our review process so that we know, we actually grade our interviewers. In fact, I think I put that in this workbook. Hey, on the back of the first page, there's an interviewer rubric. It's something I just came up with just for this workshop. We actually have like a much more detailed one that we use at Carrot. But it's a way that if you were watching an interview where you could assess the interviewer. Because that's what we're really talking about here, is like how do you assess interviewing performance and like improve that and get feedback around that. And so that'll sometimes, for us, we look at different things like, how good is their, we actually evaluate interviewers on how they're assessing like and scoring candidates. But one of the big ones is candidate experience. The thing is we never get feedback from candidates. Like as interviewers, it's so hard because we're in a powerful position. So, and it's just weird the whole thing is weird for candidates, right? And then the only place we get feedback is like a scathing Glassdoor review, and you're just like, no, like that's the one place. I didn't want everyone to see how badly this went. So candidate experience, it really matters, like way more than we think. I'm trying to think ethic. Has anyone encountered like unethical interviewing situations that we can help with?
Yes. So I actually talked to a lot of people about their candidate experience, and I was talking to an engineer who said that one of her first interviews, she had gone through something similar to General Assembly, but her program, they charged her after she graduated and got a job and would get a percentage of her income would go to the program.
Mm-hmm.
And so the interviewer seemed very concerned about how she was going to manage her finances if a percentage of her income was going to the program.
Yeah, I have seen that in general, where interviewers are concerned about like, oh, but this candidate seems so passionate about X. Well, they really like to work here. I view all of this as it's the case of, well, this mom really want to travel and get this promotion to travel, and it's like dads aren't getting asked that, right? That's the canonical one for me, is like the woman who's not given the promotion because like, oh, but she's probably doesn't want it because she's too busy being a mom or something, and you're like, whoa. As interviewers and hiring managers, like, yeah, let people make their own decisions. Yeah, that sucks. Interviewers don't do that. Yes. Oh, cool. I'll go back and then to you.
I was just going to add, there's a number of things that are illegal in the state of California to ask. So your previous salary, things about your protected class status, like your identity. So as far as like moral grounds are concerned, I would just look at some of the California law. We do a pretty good job in the state of California of like governing some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for what's a candidate going to sue a company for a job? But yes, we should be doing the right thing.
I was going to say something along those lines. So I lead talent at my company, and we make sure to train all of our interviewers on questions that are illegal and to avoid. And something that we also do to ensure kind of a consistent and positive experience for the candidate is before every single interview, we do a roundup. And we make sure all of our interviewers know the areas that they're supposed to focus on and things that they should not focus on and avoid. And then we do a debrief at the end of the interview. And we always have someone from recruiting in both of those to guide the conversation and make sure that the interviewers know what they're supposed to be giving feedback on and focused on in the interview process.
That is so helpful. I love it, especially the like pre-interview. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Do you have any advice on how to like save an interview going badly if you're in a pair with someone, like say everyone knows the guidelines, but maybe for whatever reason the personality of the other person who's interviewing is like leading to the candidate having a really difficult time, and you're like trying to salvage the candidate experience?
Yeah, I feel like that's like life skills. So, so useful in so many situations. Yeah, I don't think I have like a very like silver bullet-y thing here other than, well, one is do the best you can in the moment in terms of, I would say talk to the candidate and just try and shift and see if you can go in a different direction. Maybe you've worked out that you guys are asking different questions or something. But basically just read how the candidate is feeling and talk to the candidate. It's kind of like when you see someone getting bullied by someone else. Like the tactic is you often try to talk to the person who's being bullied and see how you can help there. Although I guess your co-pair isn't trying to bully, so but it might make everything more awkward to like talk to you that And then I would just say, it's just like one interview, and you're gonna do the best you can, and then it's just like about your reflecting with that, with your colleague afterwards, because it's a long game. All the relationships are long term, so, and if it's a bigger issue, talk to your recruiter or HR person, because they'll be able to probably help with like interviewer trainings and such. Here, try this one.
Thanks. Do you have suggestions for resources online for how to build a really clear and bias-free rubric for your technical interviews? Because I know that I have worked for companies that had no rubric. Like they had, this is a list of questions you should ask, and then assess based on your personal experience whether you think this person could be effective in their role. And I'm just wondering, for companies that are starting from scratch, what would you suggest?
Yes, I would suggest, first of all, often there's some kind of applicant tracking system like Lever or Greenhouse. First of all, see if there's like a form or something in there. Like a lot of those systems have forms, and so see start with whatever interviewers are having to fill out to begin with. And maybe it's in the ATS, maybe you can work, we have 1 minute? All right, cool. Maybe it's just like you start making a Google form, or you start, honestly, since for in-office on-sites, like you can print something. I know you're asking about like what the content is. Yeah. And I honestly don't know, and I suspect that it's an area ripe for like collaboration and sharing. And I'm happy to chat with you more after this, but yeah. It would be super cool. Like, we confuse how we don't want to share our questions online with, because like that part of the point is that people are trying to solve, like a programming question, they're trying to solve it in the moment. This doesn't help if they have the answer, although that would be an interesting concept if we could get to that actually. But everything else about interviewing, like why aren't we sharing? Like we could be helping each other out. I'm happy to chat more about this afterwards. You can email me at luce@carrot.io. You can also LinkedIn me, and I'm happy to, I love talking about this stuff, so happy to help candidates and interviewers. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Luz.
And I just want to plug again, send your colleagues and friends to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative on the 25th of October. We're doing an after-work interviewer workshop with the pair programming, like with the pair practice. Yeah.
When you give the feedback, because companies never give feedback to interviewers.
You're
giving feedback, that's a new
we give feedback to interviewers.
How do you give it, by email?
We use Slack a lot, or we'll talk. If it's negative, we'll have a conversation. We have a whole internal performance mentorship team that does more of the development work if there's negative.
But it's more like one-on-one with the candidate?
Oh, well, we get all of our candidates to take a survey after their interviews where they give us feedback, and they know that we're not the company they're applying for.
Right.
So it just helps, right? Because it's like, we're not going to make a decision. We've already done our bit.
Right.
You tell us what it was like. And then we actually get 60% of candidates actually give feedback.
They give you feedback.
And then we send it to interviewers, yep. Not right away. We don't try to, so they don't match it up.
Do you give feedback to the interviewees?
Oh, to candidates?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Well, okay. Oh, this is a whole other ballgame. And folks can leave, but I'm happy to chat about it.